Welcome back to Social 20-1. This is lesson 19. In lesson 19, we have one objective. Understand that there are still some groups today seeking self-determination. If you don't remember what self-determination means, go back, take a look at that. There is an assignment, and it is simple as this, just in your notes. I want you to look at the concept of self-determination and identify some groups still in the 21st century seeking self-determination. Here's a map of Europe in 1914 that identifies the combatants of World War I. It is the age of empires. Central Europe is dominated by the German, Russian, Austrian-Hungarian empires. What we see as a consequence of World War I, specifically the Treaty of Versailles and some of Wilson's 14 points, is that the map will change, that the Austrian-Hungarian Empire will be divided. Some of the territory will become a part of Poland and Czechoslovakia and Austria and Hungary and Yugoslavia. The Russian Empire will be divided. We'll see the creation of new countries as well, as parts of Russia become Poland. And today we know that there's countries like Ukraine and Moldova, Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia become independent. So this is the concept of self-determination. And even Yugoslavia no longer exists today, because that country will break up into countries like Serbia and Slovenia, Croatia. So self-determination has been a force that has changed the map of Europe. And ultimately today we're looking at to what extent may it continue to change the map of the world. So review the concept of self-determination. Here's the link here. You can look at Wilson's concept.
The 14 points. On January 8, 1918, President Woodrow Wilson delivered his famous 14-point speech.
And good news, we don't need to memorize all 14 points, right? For the sake of today's class, today's lesson, our key concept we want you to go back and review is self-determination. So we want you to be able to understand self-determination is autonomy, independence, being able to govern oneself, to have independence from a colonial or a mother country, some kind of imperialist master.
The 14th and most influential.
So that's why that's linked there. Self-determination also fits into last year's concept of decolonization from Social 10. In Social 10, you looked at the age of imperialism and the scramble for Africa. At the end of that case study, you look at decolonization, when the age of imperialism ends and the British and the French and the Portuguese and the German and the Dutch and the Belgian and these empires begin to break up, and the colonies become independent. They get self-determination. Now, the British Empire, for the most part, they break up peacefully, but the French try to hang on in Algeria. The French try to hang on in Vietnam, and this will lead to war. So if self-determination is this idea of pursuing your own nation state, because there's a sense of nationalism among the people that is different than the current political body, right? The current entity that you live in an empire, or you live in someone else's nation state. The question could be asked, what is a nation state? Well, it's a combination of two words, is it not? It's a combination of nation and state. Nation and state. So, taking quite literally, a nation state is when you have a nation that has a state. It's a nation that has achieved self-determination. They've achieved that degree of independence, of autonomy, of sovereignty, and that nation enjoys a identifiable region on the planet that is theirs. So, is every country in the world a nation state? Well, you could debate that, because not every country is the land of one dominant nation. Looking at Canada, for example, Canada is a nation of many nations. We have more than 600 First Nations. We have dozens of European nations here. We have dozens of African and Asian nations that call Canada their home. And in our system of multiculturalism and plurality and tolerance, that diversity is what defines our nation. But are we a nation state? Are we a state of one nation? At the beginning of this course, we looked at different types of nationalism. And there isn't one ethnic or religious or even linguistic nation that holds all Canadians together. So maybe if Canada is a nation state, it's a civic nation state. It's a legal system that holds us together as one people. So nations seeking independence, we have these ideas of, how do we know you're a nation state? You have defined territory, you have permanent population, you have a capacity to enter into relations with other nations. So one of the things that nations want when they declare their independence or they break away is they want to be recognized by other nations. And it can be quite controversial, who recognizes who. Not every nation in the world, not every country in the world recognizes Israel as a legitimate nation. Or maybe some don't recognize Palestine because they have conflicting interests. Some don't recognize Taiwan today. Others don't recognize some of the breakaway regions in Ukraine as being independent from Ukraine. And they think that maybe those regions are just being manipulated by the Russians. Tibet's another example. Is Tibet a region within China, or is Tibet a separate nation of its own that is just being occupied by the Chinese? So there's some links here that you can look at to gather some more information about who's fighting for independence. It's a quick video. It's 2 minutes long. I don't think that's too much to do there. Here's a quick little look at Tibet as well.
The Dalai Lama recently implied that he would be the last person to hold this position.
This is a 3-minute video that's going to teach you more about the politics and the culture and the religion around Tibet. And then there's a link at the breakup of Yugoslavia. Take a look at that as well. So here's some potential independent states in Europe. Places you've heard of, like Scotland. That's currently a part of the United Kingdom, along with maybe Wales. There's, depending upon the time, surveys would indicate that the majority of people in Scotland would be accepting of independence. Within the Netherlands, you might have areas that are seeking independence. Within Belgium, there's areas seeking independence. So we have places like Flanders and Wallonia. In France, you have Brittany. In Spain, you have Galicia and the Basque country, and Catalonia and Andalusia. So we have lots of places on this map, and some of them have quite a rich history, quite a rich culture, distinctive from those around them. When you go to Spain and you go into Catalonia, it's different than being in Madrid here, or comparing Madrid with Andalusia. It is different. So definitely, and the Scots definitely are different people than the Welsh, and the Welsh are different than the Irish, and the Irish are different than the English. So we do have this idea of, potentially the map of the world could continue to change. And you have groups of people like the Kurds that find themselves in multiple countries. They're in Turkey, they're in Syria, they're in Iran, they're in Iraq, they're in Armenia and Azerbaijan, and it's going to be difficult for them to unite them. So here's some other videos about who's seeking autonomy, independence, self-government, self-determination. Because we're Canadians, one of the key stories here are the Quebecois and their desire for independence. So You can review politically how they've tried to achieve independence with the 1995 referendum, the 1980 referendum. The vote in 1995 was very close. We can also look back to the 1970 October crisis when instead of using politics, they tried to use violence. They kidnapped two politicians, Pierre Laporte and James Richard Cross, in order to try to use intimidation to get their way. Connected to the FLQ crisis is probably the most famous moment in Canadian politics. This is when then Prime Minister Pierre Trudeau decided he needed to invoke the War Measures Act to take extraordinary measures to stop the apparent insurrection, and he was being interviewed at the steps of Parliament Hill, and the interviewer was trying to ask him, these tough questions like, how far are you willing to go? And very famously, Trudeau says, just watch me. And you know what? I know it's summertime, and you're not going to want to, look at all these links, and maybe you're going to pretend that you looked at them, but this is a 7-minute video that all Canadians should probably watch. Here's some cartoons about the concept of self-determination. The United States is recognizing Kosovo as an independent nation, and these other countries like the Basque region or South Odessa, they're saying, dude, what about us? We want to be independent too. So that's how you might get tested on this. And this is how it relates back to related issue 4. To what extent should individuals and groups in Canada embrace a national identity, not a hybrid, not like some hyphenated Canadianism or not some kind of independent identity? To what extent should we say, you know what, I'm Canadian first and then Albertan. I don't want to separate. I don't want an independent Alberta. So that's being wrestled with there. Here's how you might see this on an essay. A legitimate government recognizes that civil liberties must be reasonably limited under the transparency of a free and democratic society during times of apparent, real, or imagined domestic or international insecurity. A responsible citizen will not allow their will to be silenced, but rather understand that at times it might need to be muted. We must not confuse dissent with disloyalty. When the loyal opposition dies, I think the soul of America dies with it. We cannot defend freedom abroad by deserting it at home. So, there's a couple of things to think about there as well. With some legs for next year, those concepts will come back. Enjoy your day.